Okay, so this is a review of our renewable heating and cooling plan, or how we plan to decarbonize space and water heating emissions in Denver. First, I'll go over some of the community engagement that went into this plan. We worked with over 300 of our stakeholders. And we held 2 workforce roundtables, one dedicated to contractors and one dedicated to property managers, facility managers, and building engineers. We also held around 50 phone calls with low and medium income households and conducted an online survey to confirm our findings in the phone calls and expand the sample size. And we held 6 advisory group charrettes, and those 6 were 2 each, with the first group being public health and air quality experts, the second being contractor space, and the third being property owners, building owners, and residential stakeholders. When we look at gas use in Denver, and this is often the story across our climate zone, 97% of gas use in residential and commercial buildings is for space and water heating alone. So those 2 end uses represent a huge majority of gas emissions in residential commercial buildings. The remaining 3% is for cooking, clothes drying, pool heating, and gas fireplaces and miscellaneous uses like that. So what you will find is throughout this plan and throughout this presentation, we're really focused on addressing water and space heating, because that's where we know we can make a big impact on emissions. When we talk about building electrification, what we found in our plan is actually it's a really high impact climate strategy. First of all, natural gas is actually methane. So methane is the primary component of natural gas, and it's around 80 times more potent than carbon dioxide over like a 20-year time frame. So making meaningful reductions in methane today has really, really high impact climate benefits, especially if we're able to reduce methane leaks throughout like distribution and transportation. And we also found that Xcel Energy has significant goals to decarbonize its electric mix. So currently the grid is around 30% or so renewable, and by 2030, their grid is going to be 80% renewable, and they have a 100% renewable goal by 2050. And Denver is actually looking to further accelerate that timeline. So we have a goal of being 100% renewable city by 2030. So 2030 is well within the lifetime of any heat pump installed today, assuming it can run for 15 or 20 years. It is going to be operating on a primarily renewable powered grid. And I already see a question or a hand raised. Sorry, was that you, Elizabeth? Let's see.
Hi, Anne. How about we go through the whole presentation, and then I think we can take questions, because we'll have a good discussion and lots of time for questions at the end. Okay, that sounds good. Yeah. And everyone, feel free to type questions as you think of them in the chat. But since we have a big group from a diverse background, we can stay on as long as folks want to kind of get through all the questions and discussion. But let's kind of just we'll do the technical briefing for everyone to start.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, great.
And then the third reason that building electrification has such a huge climate benefit is because we're going from something like 90% efficient furnaces and boilers to heat pumps, which are 200 to 300% efficient in our climate zone. And the reason they're able to be more than 100% efficient is not magic. It's because they're moving heat rather than generating it. So rather than burning something or heating something up directly, every unit of energy put into a heat pump is able to effectively move 2 to 3 units of energy for heating needs. One of our interesting findings pertaining to Denver and likely other communities in Colorado is that not everyone has air conditioning today. So we found that approximately 30% of Denver homes do not have air conditioning, and this instance is likely to be even higher in mountain communities. And we see that our climate is really warming up. We saw that just last week. We had a pretty uncharacteristic heat wave for Colorado, and for Denver, it was around 90 degrees in June. And I think a lot of us, including myself, wish we had cooling. And obviously heat pumps are able to provide both heating and cooling to a space. That's why we're able to leverage that benefit. There's also significant equity findings in the plan. You'll find that, you know, what we were able to come across is when we've done sort of programs in Denver, around 30% of low-income homes, the gas equipment actually fails carbon monoxide tests. And another data set we just received from the Colorado Energy Office and the Energy Resource Center, which is a local provider of energy efficiency in the income qualified space here locally, found that something like 95% of income qualified homes in Denver do not have carbon monoxide detectors or functional carbon monoxide detectors, and around 40% have excessive carbon monoxide levels. So pretty significant findings, especially when you compare that to some of the much lower rates in market rate homes. So around 5% of gas equipment in market rate homes also fails carbon monoxide tests, but that's at a rate of six times less than low income homes. There's a growing body of research discussing the negative indoor air quality effects of gas combustion. And so a number of statistics coming out, like residents of homes with gas appliances have nearly 3 times the rate of asthma compared to homes with electric appliances, and kids especially are really impacted by homes that use gas stoves for cooking. So while it's not a huge climate benefit for us to address cooking, it is something we want to think about when we want to improve exposure levels or other public health metrics in Denver. What our analysis really found, and we'll dig into this in detail, is that at end of life, so when a furnace or air conditioning compressor or hot water heater fails, most homes and buildings can replace it with an electric equivalent with a similar cost for both installation and operation as they would pay with a new gas system. So that's really our intervention point, is when a system is already failing and the homeowner or the building owner is already looking to replace that with something new. That's when a heat pump can be very, very cost effective. We also did, we worked with Xcel Energy to understand the grid impacts of building electrification in Denver. So Xcel Energy was able to share some anonymized and aggregated electric feeder level data, as well as some gas data and data around our downtown steam system. So layering all that over to understand, okay, now what happens when we electrify residential buildings, multifamily buildings, downtown offices? What does that do to our electric system? And what we found is that the grid today is actually built out to withstand such a high air conditioning load that we have a really long runway before the winter peak starts to look like the summer peak. And winter heating needs today can very easily shift to being powered by renewable electricity. The details of our grid analysis are here on these 2 graphs. The first one on the left is we wanted to understand what does 25% building electrification look like? What does it, you know, if we're able to deploy 20 heat pumps in 25% of Denver's buildings and homes, what does that do to the grid? The orange bar represents the current summer peak, and the blue bar above that represents additional EV charging load that might be coincident with the summer peak based on our 2030 goals filed in the Transportation Electrification Plan by Xcel. So that's around 70,000 electric vehicles in Denver by 2030. The gray bar represents the current winter peak, and then we modeled a number of different scenarios to understand how different technology packages and scenarios impact the grid. So on the very right is the minimum cold climate air source heat pump. So that's kind of like what you would see as a lower cost product. And on the right is the balanced and 50% hybrid scenario. And 50% hybrid, for example, represents a scenario where we're utilizing gas backup for 50% of heat pump installation rather than electric resistance. And the balanced scenario represents kind of a mix of technologies, some cold climate air source heat pumps, some gas supplemental heat and backup, and some weatherization efforts as well. And what you'll find is a lot of our findings through the economic analysis really suggest that the balanced and 50% hybrid approach is where Denver should be focusing its efforts on. So deploying heat pumps, sometimes with gas backup, when it's cost effective, and thinking about how to pair that with energy efficiency as well. As we move on to 50% building electrification, that's where we see sort of the unmanaged approach of just deploying some of the lowest cost heat pumps on the market start to trigger the winter peak starting to look more like the summer peak. But if we kind of take the route that our economic analysis is suggesting, which is more the balanced and 50% hybrid approach, we still have quite a bit of headroom. And that's without any growth, additional growth on the summer peak as well. When we look at 100% building electrification, the balanced and 50% hybrid scenarios, actually the winter peak looks the same as the summer peak. And this is all at a system level. So there might be local distribution system upgrades, and this might happen, say, maybe in residential circuits where there is no air conditioning today. And that's where we might see heat pump installations or other technologies like electric vehicles or rooftop solar trigger some distribution system upgrades. When we talk about heat pumps, they're really not that new. They can seem very new to us, but they've been used in our refrigerators since the 1800s. So pretty established technology. And for space and water heating, they've been used in Asia and Europe for decades now and are extremely common there, things like VRF systems and ductless heat pumps as well. And finally, what we found in our plan is that this is really Denver's opportunity to lead. So a lot of cities and businesses and states and countries are really looking to transition their energy uses away from fossil fuels and towards renewable technology. And by addressing this now, Denver is really in a position where we can lead and we can be thoughtful about the policy and deliver all the benefits we want to with heat pumps in an equitable manner. And that way we don't have to play catch up later and maybe do some early replacement programs. By being proactive now, we're able to be really successful going forward. One of the things we looked at in our plan was also trying to understand how does building electrification compare to other options to decarbonize our fossil gas emissions. So the question often comes up, why do we electrify? Why don't we just decarbonize what's in the pipeline? And there are a number of options to do that. The first is biogas. So the idea there is we're reclaiming methane from things like landfills, manure fields, coal beds, anaerobic digesters at wastewater treatment plants. And while that is a really good climate strategy because we're claiming some of that fugitive methane and doing something useful with it, the challenge is that locally in Colorado, estimates say that we could probably only meet around 5 to 10% of the natural gas supply with biogas. The second option is hydrogen. So this is the idea where we're creating green hydrogen, hopefully using excess renewables on the grid. And we're putting that into the pipeline to be blended with the methane there. Again, I think studies have established that we can mix around up to 7% of the pipeline mix before we start having issues. So much above that, and we might have to start replacing pipes because hydrogen molecules are much smaller than methane molecules, so they might leak out of pump junctions. And we might have to change out the actual appliances. Furnaces, boilers, and stoves are all not really designed to combust hydrogen currently. And then finally, we have synthetic gas. So here the idea would be to, again, utilize renewables to create something, to run a process like methanization and create synthetic gas options. And what we found there is to meet the Energize Denver Task Force climate goals of getting to net zero by 2040 would be around 4 times the current cost of fossil gas. So pretty significant increase and likely best reserved for some of those really hard to electrify sectors, such as heavy industry. One of the analyses in the plans was an end-to-end efficiency too, to understand how much renewables do we have to build out to A, power heat pump, or B, run methanization processes, then put that methane to pipeline and continue to burn that methane in our furnaces. Methanization currently is around 64% efficient. The distribution through pipelines is around 98% efficient, and most furnaces boilers are around at 90% efficient. factor. So end to end, that's a 56% efficiency. For heat pumps, generation is 100% if it's a renewable energy source. Distribution of the electric grid from end to end transmission distribution is 95% efficient. And at the heat pump on average is around 250% efficient in our climate. So what we have there is an end-to-end efficiency of 235%. And what that really means is that we would have to build out around 4 times the amount of renewables if we went with the methanization and synthetic gas option for all our needs, versus if we went with heat pump technology for a lot of our needs that we know we can cost effectively address today. I'll dive into the electrification topologies, which is the techno-economic analysis component of the plan. But first, I just want to go over some key considerations. Heat pump efficiency increases with outdoor temperature. So this is obvious in some ways, but the chart on the top right sort of shows how that scales. So at around 40 degrees outdoor temperature in Fahrenheit, a really high efficiency cold climate air source heat pump is able to be around 450% efficient. And some of the lower cost options are still approaching 300% efficiency in that mild air. As we go down to say around 10 degrees, a lower efficiency option is maybe more around 150 to 180% efficient. And a high efficiency option is able to be around 300% efficient still. So all is to say that all heat pump options are better than electric resistance, but we'll want to really, in our economic analysis, you'll see we really want to make the most of the heat pump when it's hyper efficient, when it's that 200, 300% efficient. One of the second key consideration that we found is avoiding electric resistance can save both on capital and operating costs. And this is really important to keep in mind. So from the capital cost perspective, if we are installing a heat pump with electric resistance units, it is possible that electrical upgrades are triggered at that building or home, and those can be very expensive potentially. And on operating costs, again, this is avoiding electric resistance as much as possible is really key to making an operating cost pencil. And we have a couple options. One, we can put in a really high efficiency cold climate air source heat pump that does not need electric resistance. Or two, we can utilize a small fossil fuel-based system, such as a furnace, for backup for those few hours of the year where we see those really low temperatures. And for most heat pumps, either natural gas or electric resistance can supplement the heat pump in those cold hours. The bar chart on the bottom right, I just want to call your attention to. This is a dynamic of the current rate structure in Denver, and Xcel Energy is both our gas and electric provider. So when we look at the electric bills for a small office, 90% of their annual electric bills is just the volumetric and variable cost. So it's the dollars they pay for every kilowatt hour of electricity delivered. And just 2% is how much they pay to be connected to the grid. That dynamic is very different on the gas bills. So around half the bill is how much they pay, how much a small office would pay to get gas delivered, so dollars per therm delivered. And half the gas bill is how much they pay to be connected to the gas system on a monthly basis. And it's similar in single family. For single family, we have I think we pay around $12 a month to be connected to the gas system. And in commercial spaces, it's around $45 a month, irrelevant of the size of the commercial space. So that's why we see, you'll see instances where full electrification has really good operating costs, because we're assuming we're able to fully electrify the building and remove that gas fixed charge of being connected to the gas system. With that, I'll jump into space heating. We found that 4 space heating topologies represent around 70% of commercial multifamily buildings in Denver. and a significant amount of residential space as well. So typology 1 is just a standard furnace system. The second typology is rooftop units. The third is packaged thermal air conditioning units. And the fourth is boilers. The first typology being furnaces. This is probably what we're most familiar with. This is what we are likely to have at our home. And there's a number of options to fully or partially electrify these systems. Full electrification can be done with both ducted and ductless systems. And the graphic on the left is a ductless system where there's no ducts. There's just an outdoor unit and an indoor unit and refrigerant piping in between. The outdoor unit is able to find heat in the air, just like your refrigerator, down to some very, very cold temperatures, and bring that inside to the refrigerant and disperse that in the space. Partial electrification or full electrification would be if we're using an electric resistance unit of some sort for backup heating needs. And partial electrification would be maybe if you retain your existing fossil fuel system for those few hours of the year where it's very cold. And that could be a hydronic baseboard, or that could be a forced air furnace as well. Ducted systems are similar to the image on the left, where you have an outdoor unit and an indoor unit, but the indoor unit is dispersing that heat through your ducts. So it's utilizing that existing infrastructure. Ducted systems tend to be a little bit less efficient, just because of you have a higher fan power and you might have some losses through the ducts. So this is the economics table for furnaces. We'll take a look at the partial electrification options first. So partial electrification would mean we're utilizing a heat pump for most of the heating needs, and then some sort of gas backup, usually like a small furnace, for some of those colder hours. A ducted system, for example, is able to utilize a heat pump above 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and below that utilize a gas system. Installation costs relative to a like-for-like, which is like a one-for-one gas project at end of life, is around 5 to 18% more expensive than the gas option. However, energy bills stay about the same. And this is due to the fact that we're able to really make the most of that heat pump efficiency when it's milder out, above 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and below that make use of the really cost-effective gas right now. Using a temperature change point around 20 degrees Fahrenheit gives us around a 70% gas reduction for space heating for that site. So pretty significant, given we're not making any impacts to energy bills. We're addressing a lot of emissions right there. The mini split or ductless system is able to utilize a slightly lower temperature, so around 15 degrees Fahrenheit. And the installation costs are at cost parity to a gas system or a little bit higher. We do see actually energy bill reductions because of, as I mentioned, ductless systems can be that much more efficient. And because we're using a lower temperature set point of 15 degrees versus 20 degrees, we're able to address around 82% of the gas reduction or of the gas used on site. EUI reduction for partial electrification of furnaces around 24%. So pretty significant, given a lot of energy efficiency targets around the country are looking at 20 to 30% reductions in EUI over the time frame. Something like partial electrification, a very cost-effective strategy, can reduce your EUI by around 24%. When we look at full electrification, this is where we see some higher installation costs relative to a gas system, and especially on the higher end of these percentages, that's where we're seeing electrical upgrades necessitated. So we wanted to understand that in our modeling. What does that do to installation costs if electrical upgrades are needed? The energy bills increase around 5% for full electrification, and this is just a dynamic due to the current electric and gas rates. We're obviously able to address 100% of gas use for space heating with full electrification because we're utilizing electric resistance for those backup heating needs. And we have a bit of a bump in EUI reduction, around 30%, just because we're utilizing that heat pump for more of the hours. And even electric resistance, which is 100% efficient, is more efficient than say a gas furnace at 90%. The second space heating topology is rooftop units. So this is something really common in medium-sized commercial spaces throughout Denver. And luckily for us, manufacturers have an off-the-shelf option that can do both full and partial electrification. So the partial electrification option is a heat pump-based unit that has a small gas furnace that can kick in to support that heat pump if needed. And the full electrification option would have a heat pump and some electric resistance units in there as well. For rooftop units, we see really great economics on partial electrification. So they can cost about the same or up to around 12% more. And we're able to keep energy bills the same on an annual basis. We're able to address around 81% of gas use for space heating at that site, assuming a 15 Fahrenheit switch point. And again, an EUI reduction of around 24%. Full electrification, this is where we see some more expenses compared to a one-for-one gas project, something like 50 to 72% higher. We do see energy bills go down, and that's because with full electrification, we're able to avoid that gas fixed charge, like the charge to be connected to the gas system, and therefore lower operating costs that much. Again, with full electrification, we're always addressing 100% of gas used for that space heating or water heating type. And the EUI reduction, again, gets a little bit of a bump, 30%. So pretty significant. And that's due to how many heating hours we have in Denver. The third space heating topology is packaged thermal air conditioner units. So you're probably familiar with these. You've probably seen them in hotels. And they can provide both heating and cooling to a space. For PTACs, we looked at both partial and full electrification, and we see some bigger impacts around installation costs. This isn't always the case. It can be done cost effectively, but we found on average it may be a more of a complex project. For partial electrification, we do see energy bills go down, and for full electrification, we see them go up just because that electric resistance unit having to run. With partial electrification, we're able to address around 58% of gas use on site, assuming a 15 Fahrenheit temperature switch point. And the full electrification, we're able to address 100% of gas used on site. EUI reductions are a little bit more modest, but still pretty significant, 21% reduction for partial electrification and 24% for full electrification. Finally, boilers. So this is really what we would see in some of our largest commercial buildings where they have a dedicated mechanical penthouse with a chiller and boiler. And the options there are really to replace the boiler with an electric boiler. And that can prove a little bit costly, as you'll see. For boilers, we only model full electrification. There are partial electrification options for large commercial buildings, but our team didn't feel comfortable modeling that today. The installation costs are around 66% higher compared to one-for-one gas project. And we do see a decent bump in energy bills, around 19% increase. And a lot of that is because we're kind of departing heat pump technology here. So with all its efficiencies of 200 to 300%, and instead we're utilizing a lot more of that electric resistance for heating needs. With full electrification, always 100% gas reduction and the EUI reduction of around 24%. And then moving on to water heating, we have 3 water heating topologies. The first is individual system with tanks, so very common in most of our homes. The second is central system with tanks, more common in commercial spaces. And the third is a gas point of use system. The first water heating topology is just an individual system with a tank. And this is where you have currently you probably have a small gas furnace and a storage tank, and that serves your homes or your small commercial spaces water heating needs. Manufacturers now have heat pump water heaters, which do a very similar thing. There's a heat pump in there that's able to extract heat from the ambient air and put it into your water for domestic hot water needs. One thing to keep in mind is, where do you want to vent that cold air to? In the summertime, you might want it going into your house, but in the wintertime, you might want to exhaust it outside your house or building. what we found with heat pump water heaters is the installation cost can be a cost parity. So it can cost exactly the same as a gas option, or it can be higher. And a lot of that is driven by if there are maybe space constraints or electrical system constraints. Historically, a lot of heat pump water heaters were 240 volt. So if a contractor, had to install that 240 volt outlet, that could be a cost increase. But we are seeing more and more manufacturers come to market with a 120 volt plug and play option. It's a pretty significant technology advancement in that space. Minor impact to energy bills, around 1%. And for all water heating topologies, we only looked at full electrification. So the gas reduction is always 100%. The second water heating topology is central systems with tanks. So this is something we'd see in commercial buildings, say. And the idea there is to utilize, again, a heat pump water heater to serve as much of the water heating load as possible. But in some instances of really high demand, you might have to utilize electric resistance water heating. And the economics of this option are really highly dependent on how much storage you can site in your mechanical space. If you're able to do a lot of storage, you can utilize that heat pump for all or a lot of your water heating needs. If not, you're utilizing the electric resistance a lot more. What we found is the installation costs around 7 to 20% higher for us compared to a 1-for-1 gas project. And there's slight increase in energy bills as well, around 4% increase due to some of the electric resistance running. And then the third topology is point of use. So these are sort of, you might see these in some commercial bathrooms, and these are often already electric, as you can see in the image on the left. But in the instances that they are gas, our team wanted to understand what are the implications of electrifying those. We found the installation costs can be a little bit higher, 30 to 45% above just a 1-for-1 gas project. And there is, again, an impact to energy bills, 5%, because these are primarily electric resistance. There isn't really space for a heat pump unit there. Again, with full electrification, we're able to address 100% of the gas use for water heating by that topology. And then the final section of our plan is really talking about some of the solutions that we feel Denver should prioritize in order to advance heat pump adoption and the adoption of renewable heating and cooling practices. And they come into in a number of different categories. The first being messaging solutions. So we know that there is sort of a need out there. Most homeowners, even some contractors and commercial and multifamily building owners are likely not aware of their electrification options today. So the question was, what can we do around that? And can Denver create a website? Should we be creating outreach materials? How should we promote that? One thing we heard from our stakeholders is that the public outreach materials need to be really hyper-focused and culturally appropriate. Not everyone resonates to the same messages. So it's important to keep in mind what a landlord versus a tenant versus a homeowner might want to hear around their options for reducing their heating emissions. And then who are the partners that we should be working with? We know there's a lot of different groups working on this. How can we partner with them to really create materials and promote that with them? The second set of solutions is our partnership solutions. So we found that obviously Xcel Energy, being both our electric and gas provider, is a huge partner in this transition. So we already work with them through an Energy Future Collaboration Network, but it's important for us to prioritize how to continue to advance renewable heating and cooling adoption. So number of ideas included enhancing some of the existing rebates, prioritizing some geographic areas for transition based on maybe where are some of the needs for under-resourced communities, or where are some housing developments that were all built 19 years ago and their furnaces are all about to fail and are prime opportunities for cost-effective electrification. Looking at the total resource cost test for non-energy benefits in demand-side management programs, supporting Xcel to continue to build confidence in the grid, defining some of our roles in supporting pilot programs and understanding where we can make an impact there, and then advocating for new incentives and discussing incentive stacking. So if Denver ever is able to provide our own incentives to support this, how can we stack that with Xcel, make it very easy for consumers to make the most of their heat pump installation. And the second set is building partnership networks. So this was kind of built around what some of our stakeholders were telling us. First was thinking about energy and health as a nexus. And second was really focusing on affordable housing and electrification in affordable housing, because we know we can make such a big equity impact there. And then electrification in the marketplace. So thinking about supply chain solutions and how to affect distributor practices and look at upstream of the consumer. The third category of solutions is program solutions. So the first is thinking about demonstration projects in key neighborhoods. So think about equity first, some of that affordable housing, how to electrify that. Steam loop buildings. So there's around 120 steam buildings downtown on the district steam system. And steam is actually a very expensive fuel right now. So we know some are looking to maybe switch their heating needs, and how can we ensure that is as often as possible electrification with heat pump technologies. Denver owned buildings, so that's somewhere where we might have some impact, and looking at all the real estate we own in Denver, offices, fire stations, libraries, etc. Looking at older buildings, so think about historic buildings and their unique needs and maybe challenges around electrification, but also opportunities. A lot of them are less likely to have cooling, for example, so they might benefit from a heat pump system that's able to provide cooling and might look a lot better than the current window air conditioner unit they have right now. And then newer buildings, to an extent, newer buildings are more efficient, built on newer, better building codes. Electrification economics might look best right there. And then developing technical assistance programs. So thinking about who of our technical stakeholders really needs support. Do we need a dedicated web page for contractors, distributors, engineers, etc. And then thinking about how to target emergency replacements, and maybe trying to pre-qualify some contractors to ensure that quality installations are happening. Policy solutions include a number of things that we can do internally to Denver. So one is really elevating equitable housing through electrification policies and programs, and ensuring that those communities are seeing the benefits of heat pumps soon. Providing quick burn for electrification process. So currently it's a little bit more complicated to permit a heat pump project than it is a one-for-one gas project. And how can we sort of even that playing field and provide incentives, monetary or non-monetary, to heat pump installations. Developing and adopting new code language to encourage electrification. So you'll notice this plan was really focused on existing building electrification, but we have a lot of efforts underway to do some of the similar work in new buildings. Formally incorporating avoided cost valuation into energy programs and policymaking, and thinking about how to really understand the benefits of electrification through that. And then supporting and advocating for state level policies and regulations to advance electrification. So we saw a number of bills go through the legislature this past session that included language around building electrification. And there's a lot of activity happening at the Public Utilities Commission as well that involves building electrification. And then finally, funding and financing solutions. So we work with our stakeholders to help to understand which of these are really the priority. Is it Denver providing supplemental incentives, or is it really collaborating with Excel to expand their offerings? If that's like a one-stop shop, really trusted resource for incentives and rebates, how can we expand that offering? Designing no interest financing options, specifically ones that do not require credit approval. So we know that credit constrained customers especially are struggling to find fair financing options. Phasing in different incentive levels and types, maybe based on efficiency or similar things, and then focusing incentives on higher efficiency systems. So looking at sort of the grid impacts, how can we really ensure that a lot of what is going in today is some of the higher efficiency cold climate systems, and that's where we're likely to see really good operating economic impacts as well. Reallocating gas efficiency funds to support building envelope improvements. So gas efficiency programs are still happening, but how can we maybe think about some of investing those dollars in some technologies that are not going away, such as weatherization and larger envelope upgrades. Considering incentives for dual fuel systems and gas supplemental heat. So that's where we saw some of the best economics was the partial electrification scenarios. So how should our incentives really address that in the short and medium term? Supporting private innovation and advanced electrification. We see a number of really exciting business ideas around, financing heat pump installations through savings or through non-energy benefits. So that's really exciting. And then collaborating with Excel to integrate space heating as a service and on-bill financing. We see some programs, I think, elsewhere in North America that are kind of like a leasing program. You're able to lease a heat pumps for something like $50 a month from your from your electric utility. And there, it's kind of like space heating as a service as a business model. So that really concludes my presentation. I know the chat has been pretty active.
Yeah, and I can help facilitate some of the questions if that sounds good. I'll do the question asking. Hi, everyone. I'm Katrina Manigan. I lead the Buildings and Homes team in Denver's Office of Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resiliency. Thanks for joining us today. I'll go through the questions that I've seen come in already in both the question and answer function and in the chat. Feel free to raise your hand and we can unmute you and you can talk with us directly. So if that's your preferred format, we'll kind of just go through those as they come in also. And we're here to answer all the questions. I'll start with some of the questions about the grid, because there were quite a few about those. I'll remind everyone, of course, we're not the utility, Xcel Energy is, but we'll answer where we know the answers to some of these questions. So, I'll start with just some high level questions that came in about the grid. So we had a question, are there added costs to the grid or the utility for deploying the summer peak capacity to serve winter demand? For example, is Xcel already using or selling the current summer peak capacity during our winter to someone else?
Good question. I'm not sure if they're selling it. What I do know, and this was in the latest demand side management proceeding filing, is that they actually curtail a lot of renewables in the wintertime. So obviously we're familiar with the winter peak. They're asking customers to curtail their use through things like saver switch programs and other demand response offerings. But in the wintertime, they're actually shutting down wind turbines because it's cheaper to shut down a wind turbine than it is to, say, shut down a coal or gas plant. It's just much more intermittent that way. So heat pump installations today are actually improving the carbon intensity of the grid because they're firing up that many more wind turbines. So they're able to utilize some of those curtailed renewables currently. And given, their clean energy plan filing, I forget the exact figure, but it's something like 6 gigawatts of wind build out. We're going to see a lot of wintertime wind that heat pumps can operate on.
Thanks, Jan. Another kind of high level question. What is the backup for when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine? And a related question, have we looked at integrating microgrids or battery storage technologies within the model?
Yeah, let's see. Where was the first question?
What is the backup when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine?
Yeah, that's an Excel question for sure. I'm trying to think of what's in their clean energy plan filing. There is definitely some. They continue to rely on some fossil fuels systems. So we see their coal plant operating through 2030, and I think they're plan to build out a new gas plant, but there's also a lot of storage that I think they have costs for and proposals for. I don't know exactly where that is in the implementation stage, but that's where we see a lot of benefits. And lithium ion, I think, is what we're most familiar with, which is like 4 or 8 hour duration. But what's really exciting is there's a lot of other technologies in the market that have much longer duration now. And the second question.
The second question was the are we considering, backup and batteries, microgrid and battery storage technologies within the model?
Yeah, I wouldn't say, I'd say no. We really wanted to understand like the current grid system and what's really behind the meter. What does electrifying space and water heating do to the Denver grid? And how does that compare to the current capacity? So we didn't study microgrids or items like that.
Okay, on a related note, Denver's saying the grid can handle everything in the summer. So why are there demand reduction programs in the summer? Like Xcel gives a small stipend to homeowners to enroll in a program. So Xcel can turn off air conditioning for 20 minutes at a time.
Yeah.
Can you talk about those programs?
Yeah, that's such a good question. It's all about marginal resource cost. So it's cheaper for Xcel to ask you and 1,000 other home and building owners to turn down their air conditioning, say 2 degrees Fahrenheit, than it is for them to build out, a whole new, say, natural gas peaker plant. And demand response programs have always, and across most of the nation, really focused on summer peaks. And it's an interesting question because the summer peak is kind of like that late afternoon, like everyone is running their air conditioning, and what can Xcel do to really mitigate that? It's possible that 30, 40 years from now, we do have a winter peaking system, but it might be in that morning hours. So as offices and other commercial spaces are warming up for their tenants to come in, and we might see demand response offerings show up at that same point. So things like, hey, maybe asking offices not to cool down all that much overnight and maintain their temperature set point, so you don't have to do all that much reheating in those early morning hours. So all to say, it's an exciting space to watch.
Yeah, that's right. And the only thing I might add there is just that to that person's question of what are the value of these programs that curtail peak, I think we're always, the utility of my sense is they'll always see a lot of value from curtailing peak because of that marginal cost of like being able to generate that last bit. What we found in this report was not really looking at the summer peak. What we were looking at is the fact that winter peak, we won't become a newly winter peaking system for a very long time in this electrification transition. That was really the big finding, right? And we weren't looking at the summer peak because they manage that already through programs like those residential demand response programs to turn off air conditioners and through building enough capacity. Like they do grid planning for that. The big finding here was that the winter peak doesn't exceed that current summer peak for a long time. Mm-hmm. Yeah, go ahead. Okay. No. Someone else asked, of course, 100% renewable is much harder to achieve than 95 or 80%. And they want to understand more about what our plans are to achieve those lower levels.
Yeah, sure thing. I think that's why we see Xcel committing to 80%, in the next 9 years. And then they need another couple decades to figure out that last bit. When we talk about Denver's goal to be 100% renewable, we're really looking at what additional capacity we can put on that makes up that 20% delta within the 2030 year timeframe. So we're deploying community solar gardens. I know we're working with Xcel on a number of different offerings. I'm more of a behind the meter guy. So Katrina, I don't know if you have any more color to add that.
No, I think that's good. I'm just scanning through see if there's any other grid focused questions.
I see one from Gabrielle. Can electric vehicles power the pumps during outages, shortages? Yeah, absolutely. So we're seeing, I think 2 types of technologies right now. One is vehicle to grid. And I think the Alliance Center in Denver is piloting this. And this is sort of in the same way that a battery at your home can be a grid asset as a demand response, or just like in the same way a microturbine could be a generation asset. It's able to just offset peaks for the entire system. But we're also now seeing vehicle to home. And, I would say like the Ford F-150 Lightning really capitalize on the backup capabilities of that vehicle. It's something like it can, I think the marketing material says it can power your home for 3 days. That's And that's pretty significant. And, you know, even if you're not having an outage, you know, can your battery discharge to just make your bill next to zero for that really high intensity on peak event.
Right.
Bill asked, have you considered converting a large city and county of Denver building to all electric as a demonstration project? We have, yeah. So I think we're looking at a number of options now to see which buildings are really good candidates for that.
We have a question from Misa, and I think it's looking more at homes, talking about what would you recommend for gas boilers, especially when the occupants prefer in-floor type of heating?
Yeah, great question. I actually just came across this morning. I think there's some air to water heat pumps that are able to replace, I think what you're talking about, that in-floor type of heating. Yeah.
And from the same person, are you considering the need for electrical upgrades when you calculate the installation cost? Because they're seeing projects that have to spend a lot more on electrical upgrades. And so maybe you can talk again about the partial and full electrification paths and how we considered that.
Absolutely. So 100% agree. When we looked at full electrification, we wanted to understand, okay, what happens when a homeowner is now asked to spend $4,000 for that electrical upgrade. So that's why you see some higher installation cost ranges for especially the full electrification options. The good news is for partial electrification, we can really avoid that. So if we're able to usually utilize the existing electrical capacity of the home or building to run the heat pump. And as long as you're not installing electric resistance and utilizing a gas system, furnace or boiler for backup heating needs, we're able to fully avoid those electrical upgrades and really provide cost parity of installation.
Yeah, that's right. Really, the partial electrification options in the plan, we assume you can avoid the need for panel upgrades because you're keeping gas backup, and you don't have to run that electric resistance heat. That's exactly right. And that's why those come out to be a lot more cost effective in a lot of cases. So one other question, and then I think we're through most of them, but do feel free to raise your hand or type other questions in the chat if you want. Someone was curious about the plan for commercial buildings, specifically hospitals and hospital operations.
Yeah, we didn't specifically look at hospitals, but to any extent they utilize the similar topology systems that you know, I shared in our techno-economic analysis and findings. They can definitely benefit from the same type. And you know, if you have rooftop units serving wings of the hospital, they can absolutely partially or fully electrify the rooftop units. For central boilers, you know, similar opportunities as well. You know, hospitals probably get a little bit more complex if you start having like clean rooms and a lot of varying set points. But, you know, if in a major retrofit scenario, a technology like VRF could be really useful because you likely have surgery rooms that you keep really, really cold. And then other rooms that are, you know, more around that, say 70 or mid 70s set point. So VRF could benefit you there in that it can sort of move some of the heat around throughout the building really efficiently.
And the question didn't say this, but do you want to talk a little bit about the backup systems that hospitals or other emergency facilities have? Because the plan really didn't touch on those either, but maybe it's worth just saying that and talking about some of those like diesel backup systems that a hospital will have.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, we really were focused on the natural gas system and the emissions from fossil gas. A lot of hospitals are utilizing things like diesel generators. They obviously need power all the time, no matter what. So we didn't really look at the diesel generator side of things. And you know, we don't really expect to target them with policies or programs right now. I think, you know, down the road, might lithium ion be able to compete potentially, but that's probably building by building owner decision.
Great. I don't think I see any other questions in the chat. or any hands raised. I think we're good to wrap up unless somebody wants to throw their hand up right now. Feel free to reach out to Jan. His contact information is in the chat, in the plan itself. We'll post, I put the link in the chat. We'll post the recording of this technical briefing and the slides later this week. Anything else, Jan?
No, thank you all for attending, and thanks for the great questions.